Welcome to the Utility Security Podcast, your command center for all things utility security. From power plant warriors to grid guardians, and even curious citizens, this podcast is your essential briefing on keeping up to date with knowledge and insights for securing our nation's utilities. Expert intel through interviews with security chiefs, tech wizards, and policy shapers. Tune in as we explore the latest vulnerabilities, industry best practices, and inspiring stories of resilience from the frontline heroes keeping our grids secure.
All right, so today, let's dive into substation security.
Okay.
We've got this this really interesting article from Utility Security.
Okay.
It's called Substation Security Challenges, Conducting Threat Assessments.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Willis, the author, he makes this really compelling case that protecting the power grid is a lot more complicated than just putting up a fence and hoping for the best.
Absolutely. And it's more relevant now than ever, I'd say.
Yeah.
We're seeing these increasingly complex threats.
Right?
Targeting utilities.
Yeah.
Everything from like extreme weather to sophisticated cyber attacks.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how vulnerable are these massive substations that we rely on for, well, basically everything.
Yeah, for sure. The article actually starts with a quote that really grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
It says, hope is an expensive commodity. Better sense to be prepared. And it's from Thucydides. He was an ancient Greek historian and general.
Wow.
Pretty insightful for a guy who lived over 2,000 years ago, huh?
Yeah, talk about some timeless wisdom.
Right? That sets the tone perfectly for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Being prepared is so crucial, especially when you think about all the different types of threats that utilities are facing today. The article even mentions things like shifting populations, unrealistic expectations from the public, activists, and even the potential for radicalized individuals.
That's right. And that's where the idea of a comprehensive threat assessment comes in.
Okay.
You know, it's not just about reacting to incidents after they've happened.
Right.
It's about being proactive, right?
Right.
Identifying vulnerabilities and developing strategies to mitigate those risks. So it's like building a house, right? You wouldn't just start like throwing up walls and hope for the best.
Right.
You need a blueprint.
You need a plan.
You need a plan.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. The article actually uses a similar one, comparing it to building a house without blueprints. You can do it, but it's going to be messy, inefficient, and probably won't turn out the way you want it to.
Right.
And when you're talking about critical infrastructure like a power substation, the stakes are way higher than a wonky house. Right?
For sure.
We're talking about the potential to disrupt essential services.
Right.
Impact public safety, and cause significant economic damage.
Okay, so let's unpack these threats a bit.
Okay.
What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, the article breaks them down into three main categories.
Okay.
Consequential threats,
Okay.
indirect threats, and direct threats.
Okay.
Each one requires a slightly different approach when it comes to mitigation.
Okay, consequential threats, that sounds a little ominous. What exactly does that mean?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
It's not the direct attack on the substation that's the primary concern. It's the domino effect of these broader social or political issues.
So give me an example.
Okay.
How could something like, say, social unrest end up impacting a power substation?
Okay. Imagine a scenario where there are, widespread protests.
Okay.
Or riots in a city.
Okay.
Even if those protests aren't specifically targeting the utility.
Yeah.
The chaos and disruption could still lead to damage to infrastructure.
Right.
Whether it's intentional or accidental.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It could also make it really difficult for like repair crews to access the substation and restore power if there's an outage.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about protecting the physical assets of the substation.
Right.
It's also about considering the broader context.
The bigger picture.
In which it operates. What about indirect threats? Are we talking about things like natural disasters?
Exactly. Things like earthquakes, floods, wildfires, even severe storms. These are all events that are often outside of our control, of course, but can have a devastating impact on the power grid.
It's kind of unsettling to think about, especially with the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events we've been seeing lately.
The article actually uses the example of a wildfire taking out a key transmission line.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the impact that would have on a major city.
Right.
Especially during a heat wave or a cold snap.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about inconvenience at that point.
Right.
We're talking about potential risks to public health and safety.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got consequential threats stemming from broader social and political issues, and then indirect threats from Mother Nature herself.
Right.
What about direct threats? Those are the ones that everyone immediately thinks of, right?
Yeah.
Like the intentional attacks on the power grid.
You got it. These are the scenarios where we're really talking about those quote-unquote threat actors, individuals or groups who are specifically targeting utility infrastructure for various reasons.
So this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Who are these threat actors?
Right.
What motivates them to target a substation?
Yeah.
I mean, most people probably don't even know where their local substation is.
I know, right?
Let alone think about attacking it.
Well, there's a whole range of, potential motives and actors out there.
Okay.
Some might be motivated by ideology, like activists who believe that damaging infrastructure will further their cause.
Okay.
Others might be driven by economic gain, looking to steal valuable equipment, or disrupt operations for ransom.
Oh, wow. So like a cyber attack that holds the power grid hostage?
Exactly.
I've heard about those in the news.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have those disgruntled individuals.
Right.
Like former employees with a grudge.
Okay.
Or someone who feels that they've been wronged by the utility.
Right.
And of course, there's always the potential for acts of vandalism or terrorism.
Okay, so how do utilities even begin to wrap their heads around all of this?
Yeah.
It sounds incredibly complex.
That's where the four-step threat assessment process comes in.
Okay.
It's a systematic way to break down this complexity and develop a targeted and effective security plan.
All right, let's walk through that process then. What's the first step?
The first step is all about identifying your assets.
Okay.
Understanding what needs protecting.
Okay.
And this goes beyond just the physical infrastructure like transformers and power lines.
Right.
It includes things like control centers, data systems, and even key personnel.
So if I were in charge of security at a substation,
Yeah.
I'd need to make a list of everything that's essential for keeping the lights on.
Right.
And then figure out which of those things are the most vulnerable.
Exactly. Imagine you're creating a treasure map for potential attackers, but in reverse.
Okay.
You're identifying what you need to protect most.
Okay.
What are the crown jewels, so to speak?
Right.
Where are the weak points that someone might try to exploit?
Okay, that's step one.
Right.
Know what you're protecting.
Yeah.
What's next?
Step two is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
It's about threat source identification.
Okay.
Trying to identify who or what might pose a threat to those assets that you just identified.
So putting yourself in the shoes of a potential attacker?
Yeah.
That sounds a little unsettling.
It can be, but it's absolutely crucial to effectively assess your vulnerabilities.
Okay.
You need to think like an attacker.
Right.
What are their motivations?
Yeah.
What are their capabilities? What are the potential targets?
So you're not just thinking about what could happen.
Right.
You're also thinking about who might make it happen.
Exactly. And this is where it can get tricky because, you're often dealing with unknowns.
Right.
You might not have specific intelligence about a particular threat.
Right.
So you need to think more broadly about potential threat actors and their motives.
Okay, so step one's about identifying what needs protecting.
Right.
Step two is about figuring out who or what might be a threat.
Yeah.
What's step three?
Step three is threat methodology.
Okay.
This is where you delve into the how.
Okay.
How might an attack happen?
Okay.
What methods could be used? What are the most likely scenarios?
So thinking about how someone might actually carry out an attack.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to feel a little creeped out.
I know. It could be a little unsettling to think about these things.
Yeah.
But remember, this is all about being prepared.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you can anticipate how an attack might unfold,
yeah,
you can develop more effective strategies
right,
to prevent it. or at least minimize its impact.
All right. So we've identified our assets. We've thought about potential threat actors.
Right.
And we've considered how an attack might play out.
Yeah.
What's the final step in this process?
Step 4 is all about vulnerability remedies.
Okay.
This is where you take all the information you've gathered in the previous steps and develop strategies to mitigate those vulnerabilities.
So this is where we start talking about solutions.
Exactly, yeah.
What are some examples of things that utilities can do to harden their substations against these threats?
Well, it can range from physical security upgrades like, installing stronger fences and gates to cybersecurity measures like intrusion detection systems and firewalls. It could also involve things like enhanced surveillance, improved emergency response protocols, and even background checks for employees and contractors.
Wow, so it's a multi-layered approach.
It is, yeah.
You're not just thinking about physical security, you're also thinking about cybersecurity. Right. Personnel security, and even emergency preparedness.
Exactly, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution either.
Right.
The specific measures you implement will depend on a variety of factors, including the location of the substation, the types of threats that you're facing, and the resources available to you.
Okay, so this is a really comprehensive process.
It is.
I can see how it would be quite a task, especially for smaller organizations with limited resources.
Right.
Is it even realistic for every utility to conduct a thorough threat assessment like this?
That's a great question, and it's actually something that the article addresses directly. The author acknowledges that conducting a thorough threat assessment, it can be overwhelming, especially for smaller organizations. It takes time, expertise, and resources. And that's where bringing in some external help can be really invaluable.
So you're saying it's okay to ask for help?
Oh, absolutely.
That it's not a sign of weakness?
No, not at all.
To admit you need some guidance on this?
Not at all. In fact, the article specifically recommends bringing in security consultants who have the experience and the expertise to guide you through the process. They can help you identify vulnerabilities that you might have missed, develop more effective mitigation strategies, and even conduct training for your staff.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, hiring a contractor to build your house.
Yeah.
You could try to do it yourself, but it's probably going to be a lot more efficient and cost-effective.
Way more efficient.
To bring in someone who knows what they're doing.
For sure. For sure. And just like a good contractor, a security consultant will, tailor their approach to your specific needs and your budget.
Okay, so we've established that threat assessments are really crucial and that it's okay to bring in the experts to help with the process.
Absolutely.
But I want to go back to those threat actors for a minute.
Okay.
The article talked about different motivations.
Yeah.
But it didn't really give any specific examples of who these threat actors might be.
Right.
Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. Let's dive into that a bit.
Okay.
It's important to remember that threat actors, they can come from all walks of life.
Right.
And have a wide range of motivations.
Okay.
One category that always comes to mind is ideologically motivated individuals or groups.
Okay.
These could be activists who believe that damaging infrastructure will, somehow advance their cause.
Yeah, like those environmental activists who've been known to sabotage pipelines or other energy infrastructure to protest fossil fuels.
Exactly. Their goal isn't necessarily to cause, widespread harm, but to make a statement, to disrupt what they perceive as harmful activities. And then you have those who are motivated by economic gain.
Right.
So think criminals who might try to steal valuable equipment from a substation.
Okay.
Or even launch a cyber attack to hold a utility hostage for ransom.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Yeah.
Like a digital version of those old-fashioned bank robberies?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And these kinds of attacks, they're becoming increasingly common, I'd say.
Yeah.
As our infrastructure becomes more interconnected and reliant on technology.
So utilities are basically facing threats from both the physical and digital world.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have the disgruntled individuals that we talked about earlier.
Right.
These could be former employees who feel that they were treated unfairly.
Okay.
Or someone with a personal grudge against the utility.
Those insider threats can be really tough to guard against.
They are.
Because they often have knowledge about security procedures and vulnerabilities that an outsider wouldn't have.
That's right. And it's important to remember that these categories, they're not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
You know, you could have a threat actor who is motivated by a combination of ideology, economic gain, and personal grievance.
So it's a complex web.
It is, yeah.
Of potential motivations and actors that utilities need to be aware of.
Exactly. And that's why, a thorough threat assessment is so critical.
Right.
It helps you identify the most likely threats for your specific situation.
Okay.
And develop strategies to mitigate them. It's not about, living in fear.
Right.
It's about understanding the risks and taking the appropriate precautions.
That's a good point. It's about being prepared.
Right.
Not paranoid.
Exactly.
But how do you even begin to prioritize those risks?
Right.
I mean, there are so many potential threats out there.
That's where the concept of, impact assessment comes in.
Okay.
It's not just about whether something could happen.
Right.
It's about, how bad it would be if it did happen.
Okay, so walk me through that.
Okay.
How do you assess the potential impact of a threat?
Well, you need to consider a number of factors.
Okay.
Like, what would be the extent of the damage?
Right.
If this threat were to materialize,
Okay.
how long would it take to repair or recover?
Right.
What would be the economic cost? What would be the impact on public safety?
Wow. So you're not just thinking about the immediate damage to the substation.
Right.
You're also thinking about those ripple effects on the community and the economy.
Exactly. It's about understanding those potential consequences in a holistic way.
Right.
And this can be really challenging because, you're often dealing with a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
You're trying to predict the future in a sense.
Right. But even having some rough estimates of that potential impact can help utilities to prioritize their security efforts, right?
Absolutely. If you know that a particular threat
could potentially lead to a widespread blackout that could last for days or even weeks.
Right.
You're going to want to make sure that you have really robust mitigation strategies in place for that scenario.
Right.
You're going to want to invest in things like backup generators, redundant systems, and well-trained emergency response teams.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the different types of threats, the importance of understanding their motivations, and the need to assess the potential impact of each threat.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the remedies part of the threat assessment process.
Right.
What are some specific things that utilities can do to mitigate these threats?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, it's a multi-layered approach.
Okay.
It could involve physical security upgrades.
Okay.
Like installing stronger fences, gates, and lighting around the substation. It could also involve implementing, stricter access control measures.
Okay.
Like requiring background checks for all employees and contractors.
Right.
And using biometric scanners to verify identity.
So making it physically harder for someone to get into the substation and tamper with equipment.
Exactly.
What about those digital threats we were talking about, the cyber attacks?
On the cybersecurity side, utilities are investing heavily in things like intrusion detection systems, firewalls, and advanced malware protection to safeguard their control systems. They're also training their employees to recognize phishing attempts and other social engineering tactics that hackers use to gain access to sensitive information.
So it's not just about the technology. It's also about the people and the processes.
It is, and it's not a one-time fix either.
Right.
Security is an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance and adaptation. You need to be constantly evaluating and reevaluating your security posture. Staying informed about the latest threats. And updating your defenses accordingly.
It sounds like a never-ending battle.
It can feel that way sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's a battle worth fighting, I'd say.
Right.
The reliability and resilience of our power grid. I mean, it depends on it.
This whole conversation is making me think back to those 3 types of threats we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Consequential, indirect, and direct.
Yeah.
It seems like we've been focusing mainly on the direct threats, the intentional attacks. But what about those other 2 categories?
Yeah.
What are some things that utilities can do to prepare for consequential and indirect threats?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the drama of intentional attacks.
Right.
But those other types of threats, I mean, they can be just as disruptive, if not more so, when it comes to consequential threats. A lot of it comes down to situational awareness.
Okay.
And having strong relationships with local law enforcement and emergency response agencies.
So being in tune with what's happening in the community and being able to anticipate potential risks.
Exactly. If you know that there's a planned protest or a major event happening in your area, you can take steps to increase security around your substations. Coordinate with law enforcement to monitor the situation. And even communicate with the public about potential disruptions.
Okay, that makes sense. What about indirect threats? The natural disasters and other unforeseen events.
When it comes to indirect threats, a lot of it comes down to having robust emergency response plans in place. This includes things like having backup generators, alternative power sources, and well-trained personnel who can respond quickly to assess the damage and restore service.
So it's about being able to bounce back quickly. Yes.
From those unexpected events.
Precisely. It's about minimizing downtime and getting things back to normal as quickly and safely as possible.
You know, it strikes me that a lot of what we've been discussing has focused on protecting substations from these physical and digital threats. But the article also touched on something that's a little less tangible. The importance of public perception and communication. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. That's a great point. You know, utilities can have the most sophisticated security systems in the world. But if they don't have the trust and support of the community, they're still vulnerable.
So it's not just about protecting the infrastructure. It's also about protecting the utility's reputation.
Exactly. Utilities need to be proactive in communicating with the public about, their security efforts, addressing concerns.
And building relationships with, community leaders and stakeholders.
That makes a lot of sense. If people understand the challenges that utilities are facing and the steps that they're taking to address them, they're more likely to be supportive.
I think so.
And less likely to spread misinformation or panic.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, putting out press releases or posting on social media. It's about engaging in, a genuine dialogue. Listening to concerns and being transparent about the risks and challenges.
This brings up something else that the article mentioned. The importance of redundancy in the power grid. Can you explain what that means?
Sure.
And why it's so important, especially in the context of security?
Redundancy is essentially about having backup systems in place. So that if one part of the grid fails, another part can take over. Think of it like having a spare tire in your car. You hope you never need it. But it's good to have it there just in case.
So it's about having multiple pathways for the electricity to flow. So that if one pathway is disrupted, whether it's due to a natural disaster, an attack, or just equipment failure, the power can be rerouted.
Exactly. And this can be achieved in a number of ways. Such as having multiple power lines connecting different substations using distributed generation sources like solar and wind power, and even having microgrids that can operate independently of the main grid.
So it's about spreading the risk, so to speak.
Precisely. And this is becoming increasingly important as the grid becomes more complex and interconnected. A single point of failure could have cascading effects across the entire system.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. One thing goes down and it triggers a whole chain reaction.
So redundancy helps to mitigate the impact.
It does.
Of those disruptions, whether they're intentional or unintentional. But it sounds like a pretty expensive proposition.
It can be,
Are utilities really investing in this kind of redundancy?
They are, and for good reason. The cost of a major blackout far outweighs the cost of investing in redundancy. And as we become more reliant on electricity for everything, from our homes and businesses to our hospitals and transportation systems, the stakes just keep getting higher.
So it's not just about protecting individual substations. It's about thinking about the grid as a whole.
The big picture.
And making sure it's designed in a way that can withstand those shocks and disruptions.
Exactly. It's a systems level approach to security and resilience.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness of everything.
Right.
And taking a holistic view of the risks and challenges.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive
into
the world of substation security.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned a lot.
Good.
About the challenges facing utilities and the steps that they're taking to protect this critical infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a complex and ever-evolving landscape.
It is.
But I'm glad we were able to, shed some light on it today.
Yeah, me too.
And I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that security, it's not something you can just set and forget.
Right.
It's an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance and adaptation.
It's not enough to just build a fence and hope for the best.
Right.
You have to be constantly evaluating and reevaluating your security posture.
Right.
Staying informed about the latest threats.
Yeah.
And investing in, new technologies and training.
Well said. And I would add that it's also about, building relationships.
Yeah.
And fostering trust.
Okay.
Trust between utilities and the communities they serve. Trust between utilities and their employees.
Mm-hmm.
And trust between utilities and the security professionals who are working to protect this critical infrastructure.
It's easy to take electricity for granted.
It is.
Until it's gone.
Yeah.
We flip a switch and the lights come on. We plug in our devices and they work.
Right.
But behind that seamless experience is this vast and complex network of people and technology that are working around the clock to keep the power flowing.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for all of us to to be more aware of that.
Yeah.
To appreciate the hard work and dedication of the people who keep the lights on and to support the efforts to protect this vital infrastructure from the growing array of threats it faces.
Well said. And for our listeners who want to learn more about this topic, highly recommend checking out the full article from Utility Security.
Absolutely.
It's called Substation Security Challenges, Conducting Threat Assessments.
Written by Jim Willis.
Yeah.
You'll find a link to it in the show notes.
And as you go about your day today, take a moment to think about all the things that depend on a reliable power supply. Hospitals, schools, businesses, our homes.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder
of
why substation security is so important.
Stay safe out there, everyone, and keep those lights shining bright.
Don't forget to visit our website at utilitysecurity.com for exclusive intel, resources, and a community of fellow utility security professionals. Stay safe, stay informed, and stay tuned for your next mission briefing.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementing.